Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is William Roker. I'm the Director of Programs here at Village Preservation. We're so happy for you to join this program this evening. Historian, artist, activist, Jonathan Ned Katz in conversation with Village Preservation's own Executive Director, Andrew Berman. So before I hand it over to the two folks doing the conversation here, I will now, there we go. I just want to let you know a little bit about Village Preservation if you are unfamiliar with us. We were founded in 1980, and we work to document, protect, celebrate, and preserve the special architectural and cultural heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. And we've secured landmark designation for over 1,250 buildings, and we host over 75 free programs like this throughout the year. So if you take a look at the screen, you'll see that QR code. Please take your phone, scan that QR code, or after the program, head over to villagepreservation.org because it is your support that helps make all of this possible. Also, if you just want to learn more about the work and resources that we have on offer, you can head right over to villagepreservation.org as well and see a whole list of our upcoming programs throughout the next month as well. We already have June program all up and ready to go. But we are a member-based organization, so if you have a moment, take a moment and consider becoming a member and help support the work that we do. But after that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Andrew. I'm going to stop sharing this screen here, and I will fade into the shadows.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, William. And briefly, I'm just going to introduce our star attraction tonight, Jonathan Ned Katz. This will be a conversation between Jonathan and I, but starting out with a presentation by Jonathan, really looking back on his life largely through the lens of his art, which is fascinating. So we'll all get to see that. Then Jonathan and I will have a conversation, and then we will open it up to the audience for question and answer, and you can put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we will take them from there. As I was mentioning earlier, just before everybody got on, I'm particularly honored to do this because Jonathan is somebody who influenced me when I, as a college student in the 1980s, and first came out and was becoming aware of a gay community, a gay identity, sort of a sense of a place in the world. His writing certainly shaped and influenced my own understanding of what that meant. And I know that that is the case for generations of people in the time since then. That's just one small piece of Jonathan's really incredible life, from growing up in Greenwich Village as a self-described red diaper baby, a playwright, an author, an activist, and an artist. The occasion for our doing this, at least in part, is also that Jonathan very generously sat down with us for an oral history, which was released earlier this year. So we got to capture, both on tape and in writing, in his own words, Jonathan's story of his life. We definitely encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. Some of you are probably here because you have, others perhaps have not. William, I'll ask you when you get a moment, if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat a link to Jonathan's oral history from our oral history page. And it's one of about 70 oral histories that we have with some of the great artists, activists, community leaders, business owners, cultural figures of our neighborhoods of the last several decades, everyone from Jane Jacobs to Merce Cunningham, really an incredible array of people who have really great stories to tell. Calvin Trillin, Mimi Sheridan, really a wonderful array. And we're so thrilled to have Jonathan's oral history join that. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about Jonathan's life tonight and engaging in what I think is going to be a wonderful conversation. So Jonathan, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Can we put the first slide on and then we'll begin that? Coming of age, yes, I was a child in Greenwich Village. I grew up on James Street. And let's go to the next. The first slides are about my child art. And one of the earliest that I did was of a powerful super lady. And the next one, there's the lady, the woman in it is sort of pushing Super Lantern Boy off the page, I noticed. She's a powerful lady. Next one. Yes, so I did a wonderful picture of a fat woman. I went to the circus and I sort of identified with the freaks, and the fat lady was on the freaks, I think. And my father was very concerned about prejudice against Black people. And I was really interested in portraying Black people in my art. That's from a little bit later, but still when I was young. I painted two paintings actually of women at refrigerators. They were my ideal mother. My own mother would never have been caught dead in a house dress. This is the mother, the lovely mother I wished I had. Another one of her at a stove and a refrigerator, and preparing food. I always loved food. So next. Kids playing, a white boy, a red-haired girl, and a Black boy playing peacefully together. I was influenced by social realism art and saw it at the different museums, Ben Shannon's work, and other social realists. Early painting I did. My brother, my straight brother, had a stamp collection like a lot of those boys do, and I didn't have a stamp collection, but I certainly liked to draw a picture of a rare stamp as one of my early paintings. I love that with the cutout part. I was an original pop artist before Andy Warhol, about 10 years before. Around the age of 10 or so, I tried on a piece of paper 4x4. I was intrigued by the way goods looked on grocery store shelves. So it's tiny. I tried to see how small I could paint and draw. A man selling flowers during the Depression. My father, who was really socially concerned, told me that men had to sell flowers in the street during the Depression to make a little bit of money. I learned that as a child. Next. A soldier at Little Red Schoolhouse, where I went, I one day did a picture of a giant picture. It's a giant picture. And I think people were really surprised. My parents were anti or whatever, I guess the Korean War. And why was I doing this? I've thought about, and I think I wanted to establish my masculinity credentials by doing this archetypal male figure. Next. A lady who always looked out of her window on opposite my house on James Street. I think she might have been the one who reported me to the FBI. I'll tell you about that later. Well, I'll tell you, I got a FBI file because I went to a socialist discussion club meeting at Antioch College. Then I come back to New York, and I knew there was somebody informed on who was going to these meetings. And then I come back to New York. The FBI comes and brings my bill, and then I write for my FBI file, and I find it reports, these are the exact words, Jonathan Katz leaves his house very early every morning with what appear to be school books. It was the repressive 1950s. Next slide. Oh, this is a picture of me at about age 10. My mother kept telling me to smile, but this isn't the more accurate picture. I was a troubled boy. I had to deal with an undermining mother. And it comes out in this picture, I think. Next slide. I did this self-portrait when I was about 10 or so, and on the badge it said JK originally, but when I looked at this dunce picture again afterward, I hated that it was a picture of me, so I changed the letters on it to JR instead. I didn't want this to be me, but that was the original. Next slide. Oh, I saw Picasso's Guernica at the Museum of Modern Art. It was there for a while. And when I was young, and my father took me to see it and told me that's about a town bombed by the Franco's forces who were fighting against the communist forces and left forces. And so I went home and did a picture of children and women bombarded from without by something. And I was bombarded from without as a little child by my mother's comments. Next. Oh, I did this picture of it's a collage with feathers of a chicken. And when my mother and aunt asked me what it was called, I said, female. And they said, is that what you think of women? And I've thought about it since. And no, it wasn't what I thought of all women. It's what I thought of self-centered women, like my mother. Next. My mother told me about mermaids, folk tales about mermaids luring sailors to their doom. And so I did a painting of a mermaid in a halter top. Next slide. That's my mother in a halter top. I guess she was the mermaid in my thoughts. And that's a very early picture of me, maybe at 1 or something, or earlier maybe. Next. Oh, so my father took me to the Met, where I saw pictures of ladies stabbing themselves. There's quite a few of 16th century, 17th century pictures of ladies stabbing themselves. So I went home. Next slide. And I painted a picture of a woman stabbing herself with her nipple showing alluringly through a diaphanous gown. So nobody that I remember asked me, well, why did you paint that? But if it was my child, I certainly would have been worried. Anyway, next slide. Teen art, 1951, 1957. I like to think set things, art and history in a specific historical context. Next slide. So this is a nun in Greenwich Village. And she's looking down, she holds a flower in a hand. I did it as a teenager at Music and Art High School. In the back is a sign that says RIE, Rienzi's. I used to go to a coffee shop on McDougal Street called Rienzi's. At the sort of, when I was done with my homework, I would meet my friend Margot in this coffee shop, and we would talk about our futures in the theater or whatever, and imagining on that. And why, I've thought recently, did I do a picture of a nun? And I saw nuns walking along Bleecker Street, often on my way to school, but I've realized that that nun was done by a teenage painter was me. I was this repressed, sexually repressed teenager who lived in Greenwich Village and didn't see anything of the gay men around or whatever. So it's a picture of me. Next. Again, I did the nun a couple of times, a few other times as well. Looking down, not looking out. That's important, you know. I later started to look out. The nun is sitting in her room alone. Looks like she's praying or something. Flowers on the table. Next. That was a drawing. I did a painting in high school of this clown-like figure, sort of hairy legs, and then by himself in the middle of a jungle, influenced by Henri Rousseau's primitive, they were called primitive paintings, and which I loved. And again, I think it's a kind of self-portrait of a bad self-image of myself, but also sort of accurate. I was this isolated teenager. Next. Oh, that's a picture that I like of the way music and art high school looked among the buildings on 137th Street and Convent Avenue. That's where music and art high school was at the time. It's now combined with performing arts high school, and they're both called the Guardia, and the back of Lincoln Center now. But it was wonderful to be part of this meet other weirdo students who were interested in art and music, and we all loved that in this repressive time period of the 1950s. Next. Another picture of that, sort of the way those buildings looked from afar. I like those. They remind me of this wonderful school. We didn't have much figure drawing. Once in a while, the teacher would say, okay, draw yourselves. So I have a few paintings or drawings from that time of figures of other students posing. Next. Next. Another one, I think that's George, one of the other students. So I was drawing him as he was drawing. Next. Oh, that's one of our teachers at music and art. Mrs. Goddess Woman, yes, with two T's, I think. And it's sort of satirical and funny. Next. Oh, an idealized picture of a girl I thought I was in love with in a butterfly chair, which were popular at the time. If anybody remembers, there she is holding it's all about purity, and she's holding a dove of peace. Interesting. Next. A woman I was interested in high school, a painting that I did at the end of our time there. It's a big oil painting. I've always liked that. Next. Oh, also influenced by a Rousseau, a cat. I went home and did my own Rousseau, a cat, a wonderful cat in a jungle, fishes floating around. Next. riding on a bicycle, balancing. There's a number of images of male figures balancing, and I think that was me. Up against, in the background, is a building representing society. I was still deeply unconscious of any sexual desires, and there I am balancing, trying to balance. That was a struggle at that point. Next, go on. Let's go on. Upside down, standing on a naked guy. It's hard to see, with society and background represented in that building. Standing, balancing again. Next. Looking out the window as opposed to looking down and not seeing what was around you as was represented in the nun paintings. So as a teenager, I was beginning to want to look out. That was about where I was at, to look out at the world and get out of the house and not be under observation by my mother. Next. Looking out, yes. So another one. It's interesting. I really wanted to, there's a wonderful Allen Ginsberg poem about the key is on the window, Allen. His mother is saying that to him. The key is on the window. And I found that really moving when I heard that, when I read that poem. Next. A self-portrait, not too sort of odd looking. I sure didn't think I was handsome, which I think I was, but I didn't think so. I didn't feel so in my teenage years. Next. Another self-portrait, sort of in pajamas. Clown-like again. Yeah, done in my teenage years. Yeah, next. A self-portrait which I made myself handsome. Interesting. So I wish I felt I looked like that. I wanted to see this. I wanted to feel good about myself as a embodied person, and I had a struggle to do so. Next. That's a picture of me in 1956 in our graduating from high school. And, I was this cute little boy, but I sure didn't feel it. Next. And that was done by my cousin, Miriam Clay Brofsky. And it sure captures the way I really looked. I looked exactly like that as a teenager. She captured that angst. She was the one who said, you're really depressed. You should go to a therapist. And I began to it at that point. Next. Yeah, it's so expressive, that picture. I wanted to show it for that reason. Young man art, 1958, 65. Okay, there's not too much of this. There's a bit. Next. Going out of business. I was very interested in doing socially conscious, socially responsible art that talked about us in society. And I was aware of small businesses, especially struggling. And I thought of it as a metaphor for capitalism, actually, going out of business. And then you can see these figures that look troubled. Next. Another painting, I read The Power Elite a book by C. Wright Mills, a sociologist. And there's a picture of the power elite, the politician, the military man, and the capitalist pig handing up, greedy guy holding up money. That's all he cares about. So I'm still interested in art that tries in a creative way to talk about our social problems. I wish art can participate in today's scary world. Next. The almighty dollar. When this was it was done in 1963. A friend of Andy Warhol's told me he had begun to paint pictures of money, but all he does is reproduce them, or if he didn't paint them, he reproduced them somehow. And so I said, oh, I could do that as a comment. So I have a death's head of George Washington in the middle, and I call it the almighty dollar. I'm trying to comment on the capitalist ethic of me, greed, the most, quantity, forget about quality. So those are 3 paintings that I did at that time. Next. Textile designer. I was a textile designer for that many years, and from 1960 to 75 or little, yeah. And so, that's one of my designs. It's a wallpaper, and my parents put it up in their house in Jane Street. I have a clear image of my parents, one standing on a ladder in this tall hall in the parlor floor, and the other holding the ladder. I was hoping my parents, my old father or whoever was doing the pasting didn't fall off, but it was there for years, and it was falling off the wall, and I loved to look at it. It was breaking up, and that was something I had done as a textile designer. We also designed textile designs for women's blouses and dresses and sheets and towels. The next slide. I'll just say, that's a design I did for sheets. And I'll say a little bit. I worked at Print Studio to start with, and it was like a fairyland in the midst of New York City's garment district, bustling garment district. It was owned by Jack Prince, who would dance in a pirouette around the studio on Monday morning, having seen the New York City Ballet the night before. It was straight and gay artists. Jack was very openly gay, and it was a wonderful beginning of me moving into the world after living a very isolated life up until my 20s. I first met a dear friend there, Carol Joyce, and we would work into the night together as I learned how to do textiles, and we would have talks about politics and movies and sex and more sex. And she was the first one who asked me if I was gay, and I was hemming and hawing and saying, oh, maybe I'm going to a therapist and trying to go straight. And anyway, she was a first intimate, important friend. Next slide. The LGBT movement, I'll just talk about that a little bit. Let's see, what's the next slide? Oh, that's a picture of me in June 1972. I took my, it was scary. I joined still being in the closet in my early 30s. I joined up with the Gay Activist Alliance in the winter of 1971. And by June 1972, that alliance, this gay activist group, was putting on my documentary play called Coming Out, my first foraging in LGBTQ history. And that foraging in this play and the publicity it got led to my doing these books. The first book in 1976, Gay American History, Lesbians and Gay Men in the USA, and to a career as a historian. So next slide. It's a photograph that appeared in Women's Wear Daily, talking about my play coming out. And I think it's probably the first picture of an openly gay person that might have appeared in Women's Wear Daily, a field that we know is filled with gay designers and gay everything. So I think maybe I was the first. Next. Old Men in Art. Okay, 2004 to the present. After breaking up with a dear partner of 26 years, I needed to get out of the house and meet other gay men and make new friends and be in the world. And so I started going to drawing sessions with naked male models. This is not my art. This is George Quainton's picture. And I show it because there's a tendency in traditional gay male art to sort of show muscle men, young muscle men. This is an extreme example, but I tried in my most recent art, I'm trying really hard to get away from all that and show old and young and muscled and flabby and tall and short, all different kinds of bodies, male bodies. Next. That's one of my paintings that I like. It was done at the Gay Center on 13th Street in the Village. There's a group that meets there every Saturday. And what happened was the model didn't show up. So one of the artists posed. And, you know, this a regular guy sitting there is taking off as much clothes as he wanted to. And there's this wonderful lamp that we used to use. Next slide. A very thin model to show this, what I'm talking about, trying to, you know, show regular guys, not extra super handsome. I think it's important for us to get away from narrow images of what is sexy, okay, to rather chubby guys with their hands around each other on their behinds, actually, it looks like. And yeah, the spontaneity in that makes it lively, I think. You know, that's what gives it this life. Next slide. A painting of an artist friend. We painted each other. So I include that here. I like to do all kinds of you know, bodies and models. Okay. Next. Sexy young man that posed with lots of tattoos and he wanted to get more. He posed, I can tell that's on my couch on Jane Street. I can tell, remember with almost every painting where it was done because of something about the context. Yes, the green couch on Jane Street. Next. That's one of my favorites. Just you guys seem so peaceful. Yeah, it's probably done at the Gay Center drawing group, or I began it there. I begin every single painting with a live model, but then I go home and I work on them later. So I couldn't have done all that in one modeling session. Also, the models change poses very quickly in the modeling sessions. So this was something I worked on it later. Next. Yeah, bigger guy. I like that for its spontaneity. And oh, so you can see the influence of my work as a textile designer, and where he has his foot. I like to do that. It's a nice contrast with the blue of the background. I like working on colored paper. Yeah, next. Yes, spontaneous. Look, it's done with a marker with tempera paint in it, and you can't, correct it. So it's and it has a life again because of that spontaneity with which it was done. And it's one of my favorite recent ones, lying down like that. Next. Oh, it's very hard to do paintings from photographs, but there's a photograph of Gertrude Stein and Alice Toklas sitting at a tea table. And I said, oh, this is fabulous. It's inspiring me to do a painting. So I wanted to show you other kinds of art than I have done. I love it. It's just Gertrude with the crew cut is on the right, and Alice on the left, and the different things they're wearing. Oh, it's again, you can see the my textile design influence there, and the tea table. Oh, and you can't see it well, but there's a tiny dog of theirs in the picture, and it's behind is showing in the picture. And yeah, a dear friend of mine bought this from me, but I never, yeah, anyway. So I'm glad to share that. I'm fond of it. Next. Oh, that's the Eve Adams altar piece, altering who we recall in history. So I spell alter, A-L-T-E-R. So Eve Adams is the subject of the last book I did, a biography of this amazing woman who published, a Jewish Polish immigrant to the US in 1912, and she published a book called Lesbian Love in 1925, an amazingly amazing act to publish this book. And there was nothing like it at the time. And she hung out with Emma Goldman and other anarchists. So she got on the FBI's watch list, and they were out to eject from the the grand United States, land of freedom, all these people who wanted to make things better, who were socialists or anarchists or militant labor organizers, and who were not, especially aliens, they were called, who had not become naturalized and therefore didn't have the rights of citizens. So this is an altar piece where we can look at Eve, and it's in this art brut style. Art brut being this, where you pick up cardboard boxes in the street and you glue pictures down, and you put some tape on it. There's pieces of old rug. It's a collage, becomes a collage. And I took this picture in my old Jane Street house. And so the blue glass was something my mother collected, and that color blue glass that's in the bottom right is very, I had a large collection of it. So it's a way of remembering an important person in LGBT US history. Next slide. Oh, it's a piece I did about art being a commodity. Let's face it. How do we deal with this if you're an artist? So I took these boxes and cans that are shapes we're used to in our everyday life, milk carton, a toothpaste box, and you can find the artist's signatures on the internet. So I covered them with white paper or pasted on these signatures, the actual signatures. And so it's a comment on the commercialization of all art. That's, I'm trying to think about how to deal with that. I'd like to be known, but better as an artist, but do I want to sell out? I don't know. It's hard to think about. Next slide. On the wall in chalk is written that war, he who wrote it has already fallen. It's a quote. It's a wonderful, not a quote, it's a quote of a Brecht poem, Bertolt Brecht poem translation of it, the original being in German. And I'm intrigued by word art and its possibilities. Yeah. Next. I wonder if we can you press it so it's a video, and it's called Fascism Warning. William, can you press the button and make it live? It's a war. Okay. I hope people were able to see that it says fascism warning when a red light goes on and off. And I think I was trying to make a comment, through art about our scary times, our very scary times. There we are, showing it. And my former partner suggested I add a personal comment. And so I added, I am scared. What can we do? And that's my slideshow for today. Thank you.
Great. Jonathan, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like it gives us a much deeper insight into you and your life and your process. It's opened up a million questions for me. And I want to also just encourage the audience to drop any questions either in the chat or the Q&A. But I'm going to start kind of going back to the beginning. And I want to ask you, so I know you grew up in a house on Jane Street. Did your family occupy the entire house, or was it an apartment within?
We moved there when I was 2, and we lived on the 3rd floor. A blind brother and brother and sister lived on the bottom floor, 2 floors, with a caretaker. Jane Street was completely different from what it looks like now. There was a Frankfurter factory on the west side of the block. And I saw, rats running into the lower windows of the Frankfurter factory as a kid, and imagine them being chopped up into delicious Frankfurters that I loved with mayonnaise and relish and everything. And then at the other end of the Jane Street block was a giant bakery company. And of course, it's now condominiums, and the other thing has been rebuilt as a billionaire's house at the west end of Jane Street.
Well, you were, of course, on that far western end of Jane Street. So that was really where kind of the village merged with the more industrial kind of waterfront. And I wanted to ask you, just in general, growing up in the 40s and the 50s in the neighborhood, what it was like, particularly your area. How prominent was the sense of this as a artistic, as a countercultural place? Was it more just sort of an odd assortment of people? What was the feeling like to you?
Well, I knew that Greenwich Village was famous as a bohemian ghetto. Um, and I liked that I was living there and wanting to be an artist. Yeah, but there was also the meat market district active at that time. And I might go outside down the street toward the river and see a giant barrel of pink, hairy pig's ears, and then I remember the meat with the flies on it hanging from the giant carcasses of meat hanging there, and so I lived 1 block away from that. And yeah, later as a teenager, I heard that gay men made out on the then forgotten, then vacated docks. But I was always interested in romance and sex and with my sex. So I didn't do that.
So
the trucks were right down the street from where I lived. The famous trucks where gay men at that time had to be flirted. So they went to have meet in trucks and carry on. So it was part of a culture that it's interesting. It's become a part of our history now. Interesting to think about. Yeah, yes.
It's interesting too, because I associate that with the neighborhood in the 1970s, and that sort of, the abandoned waterfront, the trucks, and the sort of sexual hookups that were going on there. But it sounds like you're saying that was happening at least back in the 1940s, if not before.
Well, I didn't know. No, I didn't know about it. I only learned about it afterwards. So yeah, as a historian, I learned about it and heard about it. Yeah.
Well, I know that you approximately what grades did you attend Little Red Schoolhouse?
Well, we didn't have grades, so I never know what grades mean. That was, I guess, progressive school. We were in the 10s, or we were in the 11s, we were in the 12s. And then I went to music and art after that.
In your pre-high school years, you were at Little Red, and I'm wondering what that was like as an environment back then.
Yeah, well, in terms of art, they said, "Express yourselves, darling," and that was about. You didn't really get instruction, but it was, it's elementary school. But I didn't get instruction at music and art either later. It was the age of abstract expressionism. All you had to do was throw some paint on a canvas and be in the Whitney, said he with a little jealousy. Yeah, so what was the question?
Well, I'm just curious what that environment was like, and also, I know from what you've said and what I've read that it certainly fostered an artistic environment. I'm wondering how much there was discussion about or engagement with sort of social or political issues as well.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a family that was very aware of prejudice, my father called it, against Black people, and he was a communist in the form of activism that Tuck was his deep, deep interest in Black American history, long before most other white people knew there was such a thing. So I grew up hearing discussions about Black American history, about the importance of covering resistance as well as terrible repression that Black people didn't want to hear just about being oppressed. They wanted to know how they rebelled. And I certainly took that into when I started doing gay American history, I certainly took that into consideration, that I wanted to show our resistance as well as our persecution. So those discussions I heard in my family's house were deeply, deeply influential. My father's interest in Black American history and prejudice against Black people was so important. My brother also became an important historian of Black and Native American history, doing pioneering work to get the word out about that history, early work in those fields. And we were lucky to have this father that was so seriously and deeply interested in Black American history. He also put on, he was interested in jazz history, had this huge collection of jazz records. So I grew up on Jane Street. My lullabies were Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey. You know, seeing these, my father loved the sort of the sexual innuendos in these songs that Black culture allowed and before white culture could. And so I grew up, those were my lullabies.
And where do you think that sort of appreciation for and empathy for, interest in Black American culture and experience came from with your father?
Yes, I asked him once, and he said there was one Black kid in his elementary school class, I guess it would have been in Bensonhurst, and that kid was made fun of, and my father began to really feel bad about that. Black kid was very smart, he told me, and he was made fun of all the time. He was the one Black kid in the class. And also, his mother, he told me, sang him and his sisters this very sad song, very, very sad song about a Black little girl not being able to play with the white kids. And I found the actual song on the wonderful internet, and I played it, and it's the saddest song I have ever heard in my life. It's also what's called a mammy song, where it's, this terrible mammy tradition of Black women portrayals, but it had this, it's in terms of reception theory, it's called in academia, how something has many aspects of stereotyping and prejudice about it can also have an important influence on some children, for instance, or my father's mother.
Right. And you and your father actually did some scholarly work together on African American culture, correct?
Well, I wanted to do work on Black history to begin with, and I did some recording scripts for records, educational records, and one was recorded by Eartha Kitt. And I went to see her do it, and she was fabulous. She was really, her tears were coming down her face. I could see her in the studio. And what was the question? I forget.
The work that you did with your father in relation to history?
Yeah, so finally, I did I did a radio play for WBAI on a fugitive slave case in which a fugitive was returned to slavery, and the white abolitionists weren't able to save this guy. And then I got a response from a Black acquaintance that, why do we need to hear about that? And so I asked my father, tell me, I want to do a book about a resistance and when the Black people are the active agents. And he told me about the Christiana resistance in 1851, 10 years before the Civil War, and where a slave owner came to get his slaves, and there was resistance, and it became a big famous case at the time. It's a fascinating case. And so that was a whole different kind of story. So I looked at the importance of telling those resistance stories.
Right. And of course, during this time period when you're growing up and maturing in the 1950s, and certainly then getting into the early 1960s, the civil rights movement in this country was, incredibly prominent. And I'm wondering how much that affected your own sense of, sort of struggle around being gay and, looking for an outlet for it. And how much did you feel a sort of internal interaction around those kinds of issues and identities?
I was deeply self-denying about being gay until later. But those years of the late 60s Black rebellions in cities were the things that made me want to do some kind of work. I thought of it as activist work on Black American history that would be, in its way, a contribution to Americans, white and Black, understanding this different elements of this history. That a slave owner came to recover his slaves in 1851, they wouldn't go back. What? He was really upset. His boys wouldn't go back. You wouldn't come back with me. Why not? So anyway, there was a shootout, and the Blacks escaped to, the leader of the resistance escaped to Canada and got educated and wrote for a newspaper there. And yeah, it's incredible.
So for you, what do you think kind of finally pushed you to the point of engaging with your identity as a gay man and coming out? Was it Stonewall? Was it things that the Mattachine Society were doing? Was it more just your own internal, kind of process? What brought that about?
Yeah, well, I was a very lonely 20-year-old. I didn't know, I had never learned how to make intimate friendships and contact with people. So I ended up in therapy with an amazing man, Herbert J. Freudenberger, who at age 13 on his own escaped from Nazi Germany. Think about it, on his own with a false passport, having to go through these different steps. I think he must have been helped by the Jewish underground, but he did not remember that. So he would talk sometimes about this. When it was appropriate, he would bring in his own history. And so I was lucky. I got to a therapist that said one day, after about a year of therapy, he said, your problem isn't that you're gay, it's that you don't relate to anybody. And I went like, oh, and he said, I'm starting a new group and you're in it. And I must say that group therapy and my private therapy with Herb, as we called him, Herb, really helped me get to the point where I could, scared, walk through the door of the church on 9th Avenue and 28th Street, where the Gay Activist Alliance was meeting.
Mhm.
I didn't know, walking through that door,
This was Holy Apostles Church, right?
yes, and I think so. And walking through that door, I didn't know how it would change my life, but I knew it would change my life. So it was scary as hell. And I sat down, and maybe there were on that bench, there were three guys dressed up in, they called it anti-drag, at like church lady drag. And I said, oh, okay, well, we all have different ideas about this. I have to not be so judgmental anymore. I was a very judgmental young man. And walking through that door, joining the Gay Activist Alliance, hearing Arnie Kentrowitz say, we're fighting for our lives. You know, it's a sort of common metaphor, but I took it literally. Like, I'm really fighting for my life. And I was. And so that was the winter of 1971. And by June 1972, the Gay Activist Alliance was producing my play Coming Out, which the director was a theatrical press agent, so he could just call up the New York Times and say, oh, why don't you review our play and Al Coment's play called Faggots at the Judson Poets Church. And the Times said, oh, okay. And we'll get Martin, the director of our show, probably said, why don't you get Martin Duberin to review it? And the Times said, okay, you could never do that today. It would be considered completely unethical, but the rules had changed. So the play got written up in the Sunday New York Times in a very lovely way by Martin Duberin. And that led to me getting a contract for this first book of documents called Gay American History, Lesbians and Gay Men in the USA.
Right. And Jonathan, where was it staged? Was it at the
Oh,
firehouse or somewhere
yes,
else?
it was staged at 99 Wooster Street, the old firehouse that the Gay Activist Alliance rented. And they used to have dances there on Saturday night to pay the rent and whatever, the insurance and whatever costs. And there was rumor that I heard that the mafia bars got mad, so they set it on fire, and that was the end of that meeting place for the Gay Activist Alliance. I actually I was tired of the corny art that was hung on the walls sometimes of the Gay Activist Alliance at that firehouse, and I just went and put up some of my own non-corny gay liberation art of, I think, sort of cut out figures holding hands.
Do you still have any of
No,
that?
but I saw it once in a film of that in passing showed the firehouse.
Mhm.
And there
And
were my paintings, there or my collage of it, or they were paper cut out maybe on the walls. I was astounded to see that.
Right. Jonathan, I'm curious if, I don't know if you know this. Well, we successfully spearheaded the drive to get the Gay Activist Alliance firehouse landmarked, which it now is, which is great. We were unsuccessful in our drive to try to get 186 Spring Street around the corner landmarked, which was where Arnie, of course, lived, along with Bruce Veller and Jim Owls. And I'm wondering if you spent any time at 186 when all of that.
I did actually. A friend of mine was also living there. I mean, a particular friend of mine Jay Siegelop was living there for a while, I believe. And I met him through the Gay Activist Alliance. I began to make friends through the Gay Activist Alliance. It was wonderful. And I met the director of the play coming out, David Rogensack, at the Gay Activist Alliance. It was an amazing meeting place for romances and for friends.
Sure. Well, and so of course you mentioned it. Tell us how this all led into gay American history.
Well, my brother had done a pioneering work on Black American history, a book of documents. And I remember those discussions about what should be included in it. And so I thought of doing a similar book on gay American history. I remember collecting lots and lots and lots of documents. And I remember sitting on one of the piers, jutting out into the Hudson with then an ex-boyfriend and saying, can I really call it gay American history? Have I shown there is such a thing? I was nervous about the audacity of that title. Now it seems silly, but at the time, it wasn't that nobody had shown that I was claiming that there was such a thing as gay, homosexual American history. Yeah.
What was the response like?
I was sent around by my publisher to speak in different cities. So that was really gratifying. I remember one Boston performance, I was going to call it, where I would read some of the dramatic documents in the book, and people from the audience would ask questions, and how did you find this stuff? And I would answer, I'm an obsessive. I was obsessive. Wherever I went, I asked people, did you ever hear of any gay American history documents? And at a party, for instance, somebody says, well, Alexander Hamilton wrote love letters to John Lorenz during the American Revolutionary War. And I go, oh, sure. I'll look it up. So I go to the NYU, I sneak into the NYU library, which is private. I always had this trouble getting into libraries and getting access to whatever the most advanced databases were. There weren't even databases at the very beginning. And I go to the floor with the Alexander Hamilton letters, and I look, and there are these love letters. They were in love with each other, these two guys. It's the material about that is on our history, the website that I founded in 2008, and it's the most looked at thing on out history because of the Hamilton play.
Can you say a little bit more about out history? What brought it about, and what's its intention?
Yes, well, its intention was to provide free access to high quality, exciting information, data about LGBTQ, whatever we call it, history. The names keep changing. It was founded. I had all this terrible access. I had trouble getting access to documents of queer history. So I wanted to create a website that made it just freely accessible. That was a big part of it. I was actually I worked at many jobs. I was working as the contracts director's secretary at Scholastic magazine, way over on the east side. And on Broadway, actually, I think it was. And I first learned to use a computer there, which was very useful later. And I remember it was this big, big office. And I remember in lots of little cubicles and people working away. And I remember imagining, oh, this is really, I had a vision. This is really a gay history office, and everybody is working at their computers at gay history, retrieving this unretrieved history. So I was able to later do that.
Well, it's an incredible resource, and as we're speaking, I'm dropping it in the chat, along with some information about some of the other things we spoke about, so that everybody on here can explore further when they have a chance. I want to also ask you about Eve Adams, who I know we talked about a little bit earlier. In our work and scholarship, we've also been fascinated by her. And 20 years ago, we were able to get 129 McDougal Street landmarked. But you've done this extraordinary documentation about her. You talked about her a little bit in your presentation. Tell me what brought you to her, and what was working on her history like for you?
It was very, very exciting. One of the exciting parts was making contact with a relative of hers who lives in Tel Aviv, who was his grandfather was Eve's younger brother. And his grandfather, before he died, tasked him with the task of finding out what happened to Eve during World War II. And so this guy, Han Zahavi, was very interested in, he was very helpful when I made contact with him. I first was reading the New York Times book review one day in 2016, and it mentioned Eve Adams and it being arrested and publishing a book, and I was shocked that I didn't remember anything about her. And so I started to look around to see what research was already done, which is a good way to start, so you don't reinvent the wheel. I found that a playwright had done research and done some plays about Eve Adams, and she was very helpful after I convinced her I would do Right by Eve. So that making contact with this playwright led to other sources, to a woman who had found a copy of Eve's rare book in the lobby of her building in Albany, New York, 20 or plus years earlier. And through this woman, I was able to get copies of Eve's book, which there's no other place I could get it, and reproduce it in my biography of Eve and make it newly available.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Well, people who are interested in finding out more should definitely check out that book. Jonathan, I want to get to some of the questions and comments in the chat as well. And I see one from Craig Howell, who says, I joined the Gay Activist Alliance of Washington, D.C. in October 1973 and have been a member ever since, serving as president twice. Thanks are owed to you and your colleagues in the Gay Activist Alliance of New York, who directly inspired the founding of GAA DC in 1971 after coming down to DC to help Frank Kamany's congressional race earlier that year. So some very positive wishes sent your way. I'm wondering if you have any memory. This would have been, I guess, just around the time when you first joined the Gay Activist Alliance.
winter of 1971, yes.
Yeah. So Craig also asked, how long did it take you to pull together all the material for Gay American History? I can't tell you how much that book impressed me. The Whitman Walker Clinic got its name because of your essay about Dr. Mary Walker in that book. I know, I was in the room where it happened.
Oh, that's an interesting bit of history right there. I didn't know that, the naming of that organization. So what's the question?
How long did it take to pull together all the
Oh,
material?
yeah. About 3 years, I think. And I remember sitting with my friend Jay and saying, how do I organize all of this? It's 1,000 issues. And he said, no, it's not 1,000, it's 10. So he was very helpful. And my friend Ted Roush, who's now deceased, was very helpful in calming me down and helping me get through the anxiety of how do I put all this together. So I, created these different categories. One is resistance, one is trouble, the oppression section. Oh, one is the section on the terrible treatment of the medical profession, the guilt they should have over horrible treatments they participated and inflicted on us. Passing a group of interesting documents about, I call them passing women. I assumed they all were women who dressed as men and passed for different reasons, to make more money, to have love affairs with women. But today they're part of transgender history, and they're some of them identified probably as men from the very beginning. That's true of a number of the ones I discovered. So I would no longer call them passing women. I would try to explain this much more complex identity formation and struggle to become the person they wanted to become. So that's very interesting. That's the thing that's changed the most since I started doing art history. The other thing that changed the most is that at first I thought, oh, I can talk about gay people in the early American colonies, just like gay people. There's gay people also in Greenwich Village in 1976. But by 1983, I had tried to understand how different life was under different sex, gender regime systems. And, when in the colonies, you had the death penalty hanging over your head if you had sex with a man. So, that would affect how you felt about it. Yeah, a little nervous you'd be. And I think it's so important to understand our past in terms of the particular terms that were available to people, the concepts, the value judgments that they held, that other people held, and try to really see them in a really deep historical context. That seems my political contribution that I can make. The importance of seeing us same-sex lovers in depth over time within particular historical systems.
Absolutely. Well, and you've given us a lot to build upon in terms of being able to do that. I see one other question here. This actually goes back to the very beginning when you were showing your paintings. Bruce Rosen asked, have any of these ever been animated? They would be terrific.
No, they haven't been animated. So I had never thought of that.
Maybe it's a future project,
which probably for someone else.
Well, which leads me to another question, which is, I see, which is, what is your next project? I understand you're working on a biography.
Well, because my ebook was published, some really important new material was found out. about her. So I'd love to do a revised edition. In the new material, we hear Eve's voice, for instance, quoted. So my dear researcher, beloved friend, Brian Joseph Ferry found these new documents, and I would love to do this revised edition. I think it would be very exciting.
That is wonderful, and I'm sure there's an audience for it. Jonathan, this has been a tremendously interesting conversation, certainly for me, and I'm sure for everyone else as well. I wish we had another hour and a half to explore further. Maybe we'll do another one of these in the future. But I want to thank you so much for doing this tonight, for all of your incredible work, and of course for the wonderful oral history you did with us, which we're so fortunate to have to add to that collection. And I want to thank everybody else who's joined us here tonight. This, by the way, is being recorded, so it's going to be up on our website and our YouTube page. So if you missed part of it, or you want to watch it again, or even better, if you want to share it with friends and other folks who you think will be interested, feel free to do that. We'll send it to you as soon as you're ready, as soon as it's ready, rather. Stay in touch with us, and we'll continue to do programming like this, so please join us. And Jonathan, it's been a pleasure and an honor. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great fun.
Thank you. All right, well, have a good night, everybody.
Okay.
Take care.